Ladies and gentlemen, there's a sound too soft for the crowd to hear. It isn't shouted from the stages of popularity. It's not broadcast on social media. It doesn't echo through the chambers of applause. Certainly, here are 6 key notice God whispers in the quiet, not the chaos. Walking alone is not rejection, it's redirection. Solitude is divine strategy, not punishment. Whispers from God reveal identity, purpose, and strength. Favor often feels like isolation before elevation. The woman who walks alone is the woman God is preparing. God whispers in the quiet, not the chaos. This truth is not just poetic. It is spiritual reality. In a world filled with constant noise, endless notifications, loud opinions, and relentless distractions, we have grown accustomed to believing that volume equals value. But in the kingdom of God, the loudest voice is not always the most powerful. God doesn't need to shout. He is not competing with the noise. He waits until we quiet ourselves enough to hear him. That's why his whispers are not heard in the chaos. They are reserved for those willing to lean in, slow down, and create space for divine conversation. There's something sacred about silence. It is in the stillness that God begins to speak. When Elijah stood in the cave, broken and afraid, he didn't hear God in the wind or the fire or the earthquake. All of those were dramatic, impressive, and powerful in the eyes of man. But God wasn't in them. Instead, Elijah heard a still, small voice. That whisper was the voice of God. It wasn't loud, but it was clear. It didn't come to impress, but to instruct. And it was only heard after all the noise had passed. Many people miss God's voice not because he isn't speaking, but because they haven't made room to hear. They are waiting for a sign in the sky, a booming voice, or a public miracle. But the God who formed galaxies also formed the quiet places of the heart, and he chooses to meet us there. The quiet is not empty. It is full of potential. It is in the quiet where he reveals his plans, his love, his correction, and his promises. The quiet becomes the canvas on which he paints direction. To hear a whisper, you must be close. That's the beauty of God's whisper. It means he is near. He's not shouting across a distance. He's drawing you to intimacy. Whispers are personal. They are not meant for the crowd. They are intended for the one who is listening. That's why the woman who walks alone often hears him first. She isn't distracted by the applause or the opinions of others. Her ears are trained to hear the gentle voice that speaks life into her spirit. God's whisper often carries more weight than the loudest shout from the world. When he whispers identity, it shatters every lie. When he whispers direction, it cuts through confusion. When he whispers love, it melts years of rejection. The whisper is subtle, but it's not weak. It is strategic. It reaches into the depths of your soul and begins to reorder your thinking. It shifts atmospheres not with noise, but with authority. And only those who choose quiet over chaos will ever experience it. This is why the enemy of your soul will always try to keep your life noisy. He doesn't have to destroy you. He just needs to distract you. If he can keep your schedule overloaded, your mind overwhelmed, and your heart anxious, he knows you won't be still long enough to hear what God is saying. Chaos is the enemy of clarity. That's why peace is not a luxury. It's a necessity. Peace is the soil where the whisper of God grows. The world teaches us to chase noise, chase the crowd, chase validation, chase attention. But God often pulls his daughters into seasons of quietness, not to punish them, but to prepare them. It is in the quiet where strength is renewed. It is in the quiet where confidence is built. It is in the quiet where vision becomes clear. The woman who embraces quietness is not weak, she is wise. She understands that intimacy with God will do more for her than visibility with man. There are things God will only say in secret, not because he's hiding them, but because they are too sacred to be spoken in the open. The quiet is his chosen meeting place, and the whisper is his chosen method. It's not sensational, but it's supernatural. It doesn't seek to entertain. It seeks to empower. When God whispers, it is not because he is hesitant. It's because he is intentional. He knows that what he speaks to you in the quiet will sustain you in the storm. He knows that the whisper you receive in prayer will give you authority when you speak in public. And he knows that the strength to lead, to build, to become comes not from outer volume, but from inner clarity. The whisper becomes the foundation for bold obedience. Walking alone is not rejection. It's redirection. This is a truth many overlook in their moments of isolation, when it feels like the world has moved on without them. When people leave, doors close, invitations stop coming, and support seems scarce, it's easy to assume because you're not enough. Not good enough. Not loved enough. Not chosen. But in the kingdom of God, walking alone is often less about being pushed away and more about being pulled towards something greater. It's not about being left out. It's about being set apart. God often removes distractions before he reveals destiny. When you're surrounded by noise, opinions, and constant company, it becomes difficult to discern what is truly from him. So he allows certain people to walk out, certain opportunities to dry up, and certain seasons to shift, not because he has rejected you, but because he is redirecting you. He knows that your calling is too important to be diluted by the influence of those who cannot carry the weight of your next assignment. Being alone doesn't mean you are lost. Sometimes it means you're finally in the right place to be led. The path God takes you on may not come with a crowd. It may not be comfortable, but it will be purposeful. You won't always understand it in the moment. It may feel like isolation, abandonment, or failure. But heaven calls it preparation. Moses was alone in the desert before he delivered a nation. Joseph was alone in prison before he governed Egypt. David was alone in the fields before he ruled as king. Even Jesus was led into the wilderness alone before he launched his ministry. The pattern is consistent. Before elevation comes separation, not to harm, but to refine, not to punish, but to prepare. The woman who walks alone is not walking in weakness. She is walking through divine redirection. There is a stripping away that takes place when you walk alone. Titles fall off. Applause fades. Dependence on others is exposed. And in that place, what remains is what God can use. He doesn't build on the things you cling to. He builds on the things you surrender. Walking alone forces you to surrender the need for approval, the need to be understood, the need to be accepted. And in that surrender, you find strength. Redirection is not random. It is rooted in the knowledge of your purpose. God doesn't remove without reason. He removes to make room. Room for clarity, room for healing, room for new instructions, room for the next version of you. When you are too entangled with the wrong people or too comfortable in the wrong places, he will disrupt the familiar to realign you with your assignment. You may not recognize it at first. You might mourn the connections that ended. You might grieve the seasons that shifted. But over time, you begin to see the wisdom in the redirection. You begin to understand that had you stayed where you were, you would have missed what God had next. Walking alone may have felt like a detour, but it was actually a divine fast track. It kept you from settling. It kept you from compromise. It pushed you deeper into dependence on God. And dependence is the true destination. God is not trying to isolate you just for the sake of solitude. He's redirecting you so you can stop leaning on shaky foundations and start standing on unshakable truth. He wants to become your source, your voice, your validation, your strength. That can't happen when you're still trying to get those things from other people. So he lets the noise fade. He lets the crowd then, not to hurt you, but to heal you. Redirection often feels like rejection because we interpret absence as abandonment. But heaven's perspective is different. When God removes, he also replaces with better relationships, clearer vision, deeper wisdom, and stronger discernment. He allows the old to exit so that the new can enter. And sometimes that transition requires a season of walking alone. The woman who walks alone is not being overlooked. She is being handpicked. She is being rerouted from the ordinary toward the extraordinary. She is not being denied. She is being developed. And when the time comes, she will emerge from that season, not only with direction, but with divine authority. Solitude is divine strategy, not punishment. This is one of the most misunderstood principles in the life of a woman set apart by God. When life goes quiet, when the phone stops ringing, when companionship becomes scarce and the path narrows, it's easy to assume you've done something wrong, that somehow your solitude is a sentence, a consequence of failure, unworthiness, or brokenness. But heaven operates differently. In God's design, solitude is not punishment. It is preparation, not abandonment. It is not abandonment. God uses solitude to sharpen clarity, build resilience, and refine purpose. When God is getting ready to do something significant through a life, he often begins by separating that life. Not because he enjoys isolating people, but because he knows certain growth can only occur in stillness. Strategy doesn't come in the crowd. It comes in the cave. In solitude, distractions are stripped away. The voices that once influenced your decisions are silenced. The expectations of others begin to fade. And all that remains is the voice of God and the vision he is trying to plant in your spirit. There is a depth of revelation that only flows in solitude. When Jesus was about to launch his public ministry, the Spirit didn't lead him to the temple or the marketplace. He led him into the wilderness. 40 days of solitude, 40 days of fasting, prayer, and testing. But those 40 days weren't punishment. They were strategy. Heaven was setting him up to walk in power. And it's the same with the woman God is calling higher. He draws her into solitude to give her strategy, so that when she speaks, she doesn't echo culture, she declares kingdom. God doesn't waste solitude. In fact, it is one of his most powerful tools. It is where he gives the kind of instruction that doesn't come in community gatherings. It's where he corrects internal misalignments and downloads fresh assignments. It's where the old wineskin of self-reliance is broken and the new capacity for divine dependence is formed. And it's where the weight of calling begins to settle, piece by piece, onto her shoulders, quietly, intentionally, purposefully. Solitude makes room for God to become your anchor. When you no longer have people propping you up, when applause disappears and affirmation dries up, you learn to stand on something deeper. You learn to hear God's voice without second guessing. You learn to move on conviction instead of consensus. You develop internal strength, not the kind that's propped up by others, but the kind forged in fire. That kind of strength can't be taught. It has to be lived through. And it's in solitude that it's born. Some strategies are too sacred to be shared in the noise. God doesn't download kingdom blueprints in crowded rooms. He gives them in the quiet when your spirit is still enough to listen and your heart is soft enough to obey. In solitude, he shows you not only what to do, but how to do it and who you must become in the process. He is not just preparing your hands for work. He is preparing your heart for weight. He is refining your character, your thoughts, your motives. That kind of refinement takes time, and it takes quiet. There are moments in solitude when it feels like nothing is happening. But what's really happening is internal construction. God is building endurance. He's planting seeds of faith. He's removing false identities. He's enlarging your spiritual capacity so that you can carry what's coming next. It may look like an activity, but it's deep, divine work. When God pulls you into solitude, it's because he trusts you. He sees something in you that needs to be developed away from the crowd. He knows that the strategy he's giving you will not survive if it's birthed in distraction. So he covers you in the quiet. He hides you for a season. He shields you from premature exposure, from unnecessary battles, and from relationships that would dilute your destiny. It's not punishment. It's precision. He knows exactly what you need and what you don't. Solitude removes what's not essential so that only what's eternal remains. The woman who understands this begins to welcome the quiet instead of resisting it. She doesn't rush to escape the silence. She leans into it because she knows something powerful is forming beneath the surface. Strategy, strength, and the steady voice of God preparing her for what's ahead. Whispers from God reveal identity, purpose, and strength. These whispers are not accidental. They are intentional, surgical, and deeply personal. They do not come in moments of noise or public display, but in sacred, often hidden moments of intimacy with the Father. They bypass the surface and go straight to the core of who you are, who you were created to be before the world tried to define you. These whispers are heaven's way of speaking truth into a heart that has been shaped by lies, disappointments, and the pressures of external expectations. Identity is the first thing the whisper addresses. Before God gives you a mission, he affirms who you are. He doesn't shout it from the mountaintops. He whispers it in the secret place. He calls you daughter. He calls you chosen. He calls you enough, not because of what you've done, but because of who he is. His whisper breaks through the voices that have tried to label you failure. Unworthy, forgotten, too much, not enough. All those labels fall off when he whispers your true name. You don't have to perform to earn it. You don't have to strive to keep it. His whisper confirms it. You are who he says you are. That identity is not just a title. It is the foundation of purpose. Once you know who you are, he begins to whisper why you're here. Purpose doesn't arrive with flashing lights. It often begins as a subtle nudge, a divine stirring in the soul. God whispers vision before he hands over the map. He speaks in pieces, fragments that form a bigger picture only visible through obedience. These whispers don't always make sense in the moment, but they carry clarity that grows over time. He may whisper a burden for a people group, a passion for a cause, or a calling to build something new. And though it may seem small, that whisper is the seed of divine purpose. Purpose revealed in a whisper requires strength to carry it. Not natural strength, but supernatural strength that can only come from God. He doesn't just whisper what you're called to do. He whispers the strength you'll need to do it. In moments of fear, he whispers courage. In moments of weariness, he whispers renewal. In moments of doubt, he whispers faith. His strength doesn't come with hype or noise. It comes quietly, steadily, like a river carving through stone. It sustains you in the places where applause can't reach you, where encouragement feels far away, and where the assignment feels heavier than your capacity. These whispers shape your inner world before anything changes in the outer world. They stabilize you when circumstances shift. They anchor you when people walk away. They keep you grounded when opportunities open. And they remind you that your identity, your purpose, and your strength do not come from external sources. They come from the one who formed you in secret and still speaks to you in secret. God's whispers are not suggestions. They are spiritual blueprints. They are not meant for the crowd. They are tailor-made for your journey. And though they come quietly, they carry the full authority of heaven. What he whispers in your spirit carries more weight than others shout in your face. You don't need mass confirmation when you've received divine revelation. His whisper is enough. The enemy knows this, which is why he tries to drown it out. He sends noise, distraction, confusion, and fear, not just to disturb your peace, but to mute your ability to hear the whisper. Because he knows that if you ever fully receive what God says about you, if you ever truly grasp your God-given identity, if you ever step fully into your divine purpose, and if you ever draw strength directly from heaven, then nothing can stop you. So the enemy fights the whisper, but he can't stop it. He can't silence what God has chosen to speak into your soul. And God will keep whispering. In every season, in every challenge, in every quiet place, he will continue to whisper. Because through his whisper, he reveals who you are, why you're here, and how you will overcome. Favor often feels like isolation before elevation. This is one of the divine paradoxes that most people don't recognize until they're deep in the process. We tend to associate favor with platforms, recognition, and open doors. But in reality, favor often begins in obscurity. It hides in moments that feel lonely, misunderstood, and even painful. When God marks a woman with favor, he does not always begin by lifting her up. He often starts by setting her apart. That separation can look like rejection, but it's actually protection. It can feel like isolation, but it's preparation for elevation. When you are favored by God, he is not just blessing your life. He is building it. He is preparing you for something your current circle may not be able to understand, support, or even handle. So he removes you from the crowd, not because you don't belong, but because you've outgrown the environment that once sustained you. Favor is not about fitting in. It's about being fit for a greater assignment. And to become that, isolation is often the first step. In isolation, your dependence shifts. You stop leaning on affirmation from people and start listening for alignment from God. The applause fades, and in that silence, you begin to hear God's strategy. Favor without formation is dangerous. So God uses the hidden seasons to develop what can't be rushed. Character, discernment, endurance, and a deeper trust in him. He isolates not to exclude, but to insulate, to build you into someone who can steward elevation with humility and wisdom. The story of Joseph illustrates this clearly. He was favored from a young age, but that favor first led him to a pit, then to slavery, and finally to prison. It was in those isolated places that God molded his character and sharpened his leadership. The favor was always on him, but the elevation didn't come until he had been refined by solitude. Many would have mistaken that journey for abandonment, but it was divine positioning. God was not finished. He was getting Joseph ready. In the same way, when God begins to elevate you, he does it first by taking you low, not to hurt you, but to anchor you, so that when promotion comes, pride doesn't follow, so that when your name is called, your heart is steady. The isolation teaches you how to hear God without filters. It reveals the difference between opportunities and distractions. It makes your yes to God louder than your need for validation. Sometimes favor creates distance. People don't know how to handle the anointing on your life, so they back away. Rooms that once welcomed you begin to feel uncomfortable. Conversations shift. Invitations stop. But don't confuse the quiet for failure. That quiet is God clearing the space around you so he can speak without interruption. It's him creating the environment where only his voice matters. Elevation is not just about going higher, it's about going deeper. And that depth is developed in hidden places. You don't need the crowd to be faithful. You don't need visibility to be valuable. You need obedience and isolation so that when the doors open, you're not chasing affirmation. You're walking in assignment, and that's the power of divine favor. It's not loud, but it's lasting. It doesn't beg to be seen, but it cannot be ignored when the time comes. When favor is on you, isolation is not a sign of God's absence. It's a sign of his investment. He's not punishing you. He's producing something in you that cannot be rushed. Elevation without preparation is a setup for collapse. So God delays exposure until the weight of your calling can rest safely on the foundation he's built in solitude. Favor always finds its fulfillment, but it rarely starts in the spotlight. It starts in hidden places, lonely nights, and quiet obediences that nobody sees. But heaven sees, and heaven honors. So when you feel isolated, misunderstood, or overlooked, remember, it may not be rejection. It may be the first sign that favor is marking your life for something greater. Obedience in the dark births authority in the light. This is the unseen path God often calls a woman to walk before he reveals the fullness of her assignment. The world celebrates outcomes, platforms, titles, visibility. But heaven honors obedience, especially when it costs something, especially when no one sees, especially when the reward isn't immediate. The kind of obedience, the kind done in secret, in silence, in surrender, is what builds unshakable authority. Not just authority to lead others, but authority over the very things that once tried to break you. Obedience in the dark means saying yes when there's no applause. It means trusting God when the outcome is unclear and the next step feels risky. It's choosing faithfulness in the mundane, the repetitive, the hidden assignments that feel small but are weighty in eternity. It's when you keep showing up to the prayer closet, even when you hear nothing. When you stay committed to the vision, even when there's no validation. When you honor God privately before he promotes you publicly. This is where spiritual authority is forged, in the dark room of discipline. In the quiet hours where character is refined, pride is crushed, and purity is tested. God is not interested in quick success. He's building something eternal. And eternal assignments require eternal preparation. Obedience without spotlight is one of the highest forms of worship. It says, I trust you more than I trust results. I follow you more than I follow outcomes. I obey not because I understand, but because I believe you're worthy. When a woman walks in this kind of obedience, she gains access to a dimension of authority that can't be faked. It's not borrowed. It's not imitated. It's birthed in the fire. It comes from consistently choosing God's voice over her own feelings, from walking away from what's good to make room for what's God, from doing the right thing when it costs her comfort, relationships, or recognition. That's the obedience that heaven responds to. And when the time is right, heaven will also reveal it. Authority in the light is not just influence, it's impact. It's the weight that your words carry because they were forged in private surrender. It's the strength of your presence, not because of charisma, but because of consecration. People may see the fruit, but God knows the root. And that root was built in darkness, in prayer, in fasting, in forgiveness, in silent sacrifice. The world sees the elevation, but heaven sees the obedience that came first. Every time you obey in the dark, you silence the enemy. You reclaim territory in the spirit. You prove that your faith is not situational, it's foundational. That's the kind of authority that shifts atmospheres. That's the kind of obedience God can entrust with nations, platforms, and legacy. And that's why he tests you in the dark, so he can trust you in the light. The darkness is not the absence of destiny. It's the training ground for it. It's where the oil is crushed, where the anointing is produced, where the word becomes alive in you. Not just something you quote, but something you embody. You become the message before you ever preach it. You become the breakthrough before you ever release it. You carry the power because you first carried the weight. So if you find yourself obeying without clarity, sacrificing without applause, moving forward without recognition, know that you are being entrusted with more than a moment. You're being formed for a mantle. And when God chooses to unveil what he's been building, the authority that flows through your life will not be from striving. It will be the fruit of sacred obedience in the dark. To the woman who walks alone, know this, you are not walking in circles. You are walking in divine alignment. Every step you've taken in silence, every tear sown in solitude, every yes whispered in the dark has not gone unnoticed by heaven. What looks like delay is divine design. What feels like isolation is heaven's incubation. And what seems like obscurity is where God carves unshakable authority. You are not hidden because you're forgotten. You are hidden because you are chosen. Set apart, sealed with favor. God is not just calling you to survive the wilderness. He's equipping you to speak to it, command it, and lead others out of it. He is whispering strategies, shaping strength, refining purpose, and preparing you to walk with power that doesn't fade when the lights go out. So stand firm. Don't rush the process. Don't despise the quiet. The same God who led you into the shadows is the same God who will announce you in the light. And when he does, you won't walk in with explanation. You'll walk in with evidence. Because the woman who walks alone with God never walks in vain.